In the summer of 1941, the German army had conquered everything in its path: Poland, the Baltics, Ukraine, Smolensk. City after city fell beneath the iron boots of the Wehrmacht. Operation Barbarossa had begun as Hitler's greatest gamble, and it seemed to be paying off. By September, the German front stretched across 1,000 miles of Soviet territory. The Führer believed victory was near. "We will march into Moscow before the snow falls," he promised. For Hitler, Moscow was not just a city. It was the heart of the Soviet Union, the symbol of Stalin's power, the center of its railways, industry, and command. He believed that if Moscow fell, the Soviet Union would collapse. It would be the final blow that ended the war in the East. By late September 1941, the German High Command prepared the decisive operation, Operation Typhoon. Its goal? To encircle and destroy the Soviet armies defending Moscow and capture the city before winter. 3 army groups, over 2 million men, 1,700 tanks, and 14,000 guns surged toward the Soviet capital. They were met by an enemy that was bloodied, retreating, but not broken. In the fields near Vyazma and Bryansk, the Germans launched 2 massive encirclements. Within weeks, over 600,000 Soviet soldiers were trapped. The highways to Moscow were littered with burning tanks, dead horses, and exhausted men. German soldiers sent letters home. "We can already see the spires of Moscow. The war will be over by Christmas." But the Soviets had other plans. Inside Moscow, Stalin refused to flee. He gathered his generals inside the Kremlin. "Comrades," he said, "we will defend Moscow to the last drop of blood. There will be no evacuation. The capital stands." Factories were dismantled and shipped east to the Urals. Civilians dug trenches and anti-tank ditches by hand. Students, workers, and old men were handed rifles and sent to the front. In October, German troops reached within 100 kilometers of the city. The air was thick with smoke and snow. German planes bombed Moscow daily, turning night into fire. The Soviet government declared martial law. Loudspeakers in the streets repeated one phrase: "Comrades, do not panic. Moscow is defended." But fear crept through the city like frost. Trains jammed the stations as thousands tried to flee east. Rumors spread that Stalin had abandoned the capital. Bread vanished, prices soared, soldiers deserted. Then, on October 19th, Stalin appeared, standing outside the Kremlin, addressing his people. "Comrades, citizens of Moscow, our cause is just. We will not retreat. Let the enemy break himself against our defenses." His speech reignited the city's spirit. Workshops reopened. Soldiers returned to their posts, and the red banner once again flew proudly above the Kremlin. Then came the snow. On October 6th, the first flakes fell across the Russian plains. What began as a light dusting became a nightmare. The roads turned to mud, the infamous Rasputitsa. German tanks bogged down, engines choking on frozen air, horses collapsed from exhaustion, supply trucks sank into the mire. Hitler's Grand Army, built for lightning war, slowed to a crawl. Fuel and ammunition ran low. Winter uniforms, still in warehouses in Poland, never reached the front. Soldiers wrapped themselves in rags, newspapers, and curtains for warmth. General Heinz Guderian wrote in his diary, "The cold is our worst enemy. The men are freezing, the machines are dying, and still the Führer demands we advance." Despite the snow, Hitler pressed on. He refused to believe the weather could defeat his army. In mid-November, the Germans launched one final push toward Moscow. Columns of tanks moved through blizzards, soldiers fighting knee-deep in snow. Frostbite claimed thousands, rifles jammed, oil froze, fuel turned to sludge. The Soviets fought with everything they had left. Newly formed Siberian divisions, hardened by the cold, arrived to reinforce the front. These troops, sent by General Zhukov, were well-equipped, well-trained, and ready for winter warfare. The Germans advanced to within 30 kilometers of Moscow. They could see the glow of the city lights on the horizon. But that was as far as they would ever go. On December 2, 1941, German units reached the village of Krasnaya Polyana, just 18 miles from Moscow. Through binoculars, they claimed to see the Kremlin towers. But at that moment, the Soviet counterattack began. Temperatures plunged to 35 degrees Celsius. Engines refused to start. The frozen earth cracked under artillery fire. Zhukov unleashed the Siberian armies, divisions trained in Arctic conditions, equipped with white camouflage, skis, and winter weapons. The Red Army struck hard. German positions crumbled. Entire units froze or were overrun. The soldiers who had believed they would be home by Christmas now faced annihilation in the snow. By December 5th, the German advance had stopped completely. The Blitzkrieg, the unstoppable war machine, had frozen in place. Then, on December 6th, the Soviets launched their massive winter counteroffensive. Hundreds of thousands of fresh troops stormed the German lines. The attack stretched over 300 kilometers, from Kalinin in the north to Tula in the south. Caught by surprise, the Germans retreated. It was the first major defeat of the Wehrmacht in the war. Hitler was furious. He forbade retreat. Hold every position, he commanded, not one step back. But the order only led to chaos and death. By January 1942, the once proud German army was shattered. 500,000 casualties, thousands of vehicles abandoned in the snow. Hitler's dream of conquering the Soviet Union in one campaign was over. Instead of triumph, he now faced a war of attrition against an enemy that refused to die. In the Kremlin, Stalin celebrated but did not rest. He knew the fight had only begun. "This victory was," he said, "is not the end. It is the beginning of our revenge." The battle for Moscow was more than a military struggle. It was a psychological one. For the first time, Hitler's armies had been stopped. Moscow did not fall, and with its survival, the myth of Nazi invincibility was broken. Hitler's dream of a quick war, of conquering the East before winter, had frozen to death in the snows outside Moscow. Over the next years, millions more would die across the steppes and cities of the Eastern Front. But from that frozen winter of 1941, the tide of history began to turn. The Blitzkrieg was over. The world's most powerful army had met its first defeat. And from the ashes of that frozen battlefield, a new war began, one not of lightning strikes, but of endurance, sacrifice, and survival. Moscow, 1941, the city that stood against the storm, the battle where winter, courage, and will combined to shatter an empire's dream. The day Hitler's vision of victory turned to frost.